I know you trawl through that Lowy report when it lands every year, out yesterday. I touched on it briefly last night, but as I went through it, something struck me today, and this was obviously the detail about nuclear power. Here is yet again another large and very credible poll that says the majority of Australians support nuclear power. So, Greg Sheridan, are our leaders denying the Australian people a rational and sensible debate on the issue?
Well, Peter, I think there's been tremendous cowardice on this issue on both sides of politics. You can't get to reliable power on the basis of renewables. I mean, if the wind's not blowing, it doesn't matter whether you've got 100 wind turbines or 1 million of them, you still get no power. The only renewables that really work are hydropower, and we've got limited supplies of that because we're basically a flat continent. And the only other big long-term, low emissions, reliable generator is nuclear. Germany shut down its nuclear plants, and so it's had to go back to coal. And the small modular reactors that are being developed, I mean, if we ever get these nuclear subs, you could just about hook up half a dozen regional cities off their generators alone. Of course we should be willing to go down that road, but both sides of politics are too scared to do so.
Roe v Wade, Greg, a fair amount of misinformation in the debate here and overseas, a fair amount of hysteria too. I don't want to downplay, of course, that this is a really emotional issue for a lot of people, a very important issue. But what's happening in the United States is what happens here now in Australia. Abortion goes back to state legislatures. They're not banning abortion. They're saying it'll be a matter for state by state, and voters can vote accordingly. You wrote, I think, probably the best analysis about this in The Australian during the week. You described this move as actually being pro-democratic. That's the point I think that a lot of others have missed.
Well, thanks, Peter. And I think the Supreme Court in 1973, by simply outlawing all restrictions on abortion, well, it outlawed all restrictions up to 24 weeks. There was a subsequent case which virtually outlawed all restrictions of any kind. Was totally undemocratic, and it led to 50 years of internal political warfare. Now, those states which have very restrictive laws will probably find that they're completely unsustainable politically, and they'll have to liberalise a bit. But those states which have exceedingly liberal laws, I mean, abortion is allowed up till birth in New York, which seems to me kind of grotesque, will probably have to pull back a bit. But the state legislatures will have to have debates about it, and people will get to vote for the parties that implement policies they can live with. This should never, ever have been decided by a court of unelected judges. This was always a proper issue for compromise, and if it ends up that Wyoming is a bit different from California, that's absolutely good in a federation, and it's in accord with democracy. And it is a profound moral issue. It's not a trivial matter.
Right, just before we go, given you're a best-selling author in this space, I've got to get your take on the fairly marked drop in religious observance, Christianity in particular, that we saw in the census when the results were out this week. What do you make of it?
Well, I think it is very sad, but I mean, it's good for us Irishmen because we like to be rebels in a minority, you know. But I'd just say to you, Peter, we're having a tremendous political crisis all around the West now. And that's because politics is downstream of culture. But in my view, culture is downstream of faith. And in the end, if society ceases to believe in anything transcendent, it's going to go crazy and it's going to be very ugly. But there's a lot of work for those of us who have any religious belief to do in the future.
Yeah, it's so true, Greg. I hope we wake up to ourselves. Thank you as always. See you next week.